Hello, this is Wicca and Witchcraft 101 with High Priestess Tehila from the Coven of the Open Mind. This is Beach Edition. I don't think you can see it in the camera, but we've got the ocean right over my shoulder. I'm sitting at my friend's porch. He has a beach condo, so we get to feel fancy and stay right on the beach, and it's really nice. I'm here for the whole week on vacation. I probably will record another video here if I get the chance. This video is going to be relatively simple. The homework included in this, however, is pretty extensive because we're going into the evocation work, which is it's a lot of work. It's less meditative and more sitting down and actually figuring out what you want to do and then making time to do it, and so it can take a lot of time. So we're just going to kind of work through this at our own pace and hopefully get through this all this month, and then once everyone feels confident with invocations, we can move on to evocations at the start of next month, and we'll be in good shape. So elements, tools, and symbols of the craft, that's the subject of this lecture. I actually want to start out by talking about something called realms. Realms are basically different perspectives where the physical laws of our universe is different. I want to talk about this without having to get too in detail with the physics. I don't know how much evidence some of you need to be compelled into, well, not to be compelled, but in order to kind of understand how this magic affects and works in a physical way, which is, you know, in harmony with science, which is something that younger people, you know, millennials and Generation Z certainly demand to understand. They don't really like to take anything in that doesn't mesh with everything they already know. And that makes sense, right? Because we're moving into the age of Aquarius. All of the high resonance planets are in different places in the chart. And that has some effect on the way that people understand the world and the way that people interact with social media and information in general, and the attitude that people have toward information. And so when people say, you know, we're moving into the Aquarian age, that comes from astrology, and we're basically saying we're moving into an age where people demand rational explanations for things. Emotions are detached from our science. It doesn't, you know, hurt our feelings if some theory is proven wrong. We're not beheading anyone for proving the leading scientific theories wrong anymore, because nobody's emotionally invested that much in any given theory, since there's always a chance that, you know, in order for it to even be considered a theory, it has to be falsifiable. So there's always a chance that it's not correct or that it needs to be revised. And so it's important to people these days to receive information in a way that meshes with that understanding of the universe, that everything should fit into to everything else we already know. And that is a good thing. When people are thinking like this, thinking very rationally, it's very, very easy to transcend awareness and see past the physical four-dimensional world we live in. It's very easy when you kind of separate out your emotions and your perceptions and your experiences from your understanding of the world. So when we're talking about this kind of stuff, I don't want to go too deep into the physics, because I know some of you probably really don't care, and a lot of you don't really have a science background, but I want you to know that there is physics here. There is science here that supports a lot of the things that we're saying. Metaphysics is a whole lecture series into itself. And so I'm going to try to just kind of touch on things. If I don't go into enough detail and you're like, well, that sounds like it's made up, that sounds like nonsense, just leave a comment or shoot an email to covenoftheopenmind@gmail.com, and we can always engage in a separate conversation that goes into more detail. Members of the actual coven have access to an internal metaphysics lecture series that I did on Facebook Live in our group, but if you're watching this and you're not a part of our coven and you're still like, I don't know how I feel about this, feel free to just leave a comment on the video, and that's fine as well. So realms are different perspectives wherein physics behaves fundamentally differently. So, and this is really the crux of why it took so long for us to come up with a theory of everything in science, right? So you have like Newton's laws of mechanics. Everything has an equal and opposite reaction. An object in motion stays in motion, and the definition of force. And these laws, Newton's laws, are correct in macroscopic physics that is confined to the scales of, say, our solar system. When you start, and it has to be macroscopic, so things that are microscopic within our solar system are still in a different realm. Things that are on our planet, Earth, okay, plants, animals, things that are in orbit around our planet to a very large extent, that's where it starts to break down, because then objects are moving fast enough that they experience time dilation, but it's really, really slight, and there is a correction in our satellites for it, but it's really minor. So it's like right at the fringe, that case. But the idea is that anything that's moving relatively slowly, that's relatively large, anything on the surface of Earth, for instance, all of these macroscopic things experience Newton's laws in one particular way. But when you start to move fast, really fast, close to the speed of light, that's when you start to see time dilation, and time flows differently for different objects, and lengths contract and expand. So literally the universe looks and behaves differently if you are moving really fast, or if you are really, really hot, or if you have a lot of energy. And what you find out is that moving fast, being hot, and having a lot of energy are all the same thing. Because at some level, the symmetry breaks that give birth to our four fundamental forces disappear, and you have pure symmetry. You have four forces that are really one force. So when you get to high-level physics, you throw out units of distance and time, and you put everything in units of energy, because we're talking about a fundamental world where everything is. And that's what everything has in common, that everything is, that everything exists. And otherwise, and you know, you don't, at that level of physics, you don't have like a separation between things as distinctly as you do in the physical world. So these are where the realms are. So you have the physical realm, and then you have, and that's where we live, and then you have, some call it the mundane realm. And then you have the astral realm. That is literally the size of and the scale of space. So when we say that you're astral traveling, we mean that you're moving through time and space like a particle would move through real space. It's like a way to project yourself outwards around you, so that, you know, everything on Earth becomes like a single speck in a large galaxy, and there's tons and tons of galaxies. And then it's like nothing that you experience as an individual matters, because everything is so small compared to the whole universe. And that can be used to basically, you know, it can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be used to broaden your mind, and it can be used to reduce pain and heal yourself. It has a lot of different applications. But so the realm is just a place. It's not really a place. I mean, it's not like a place like you get in your car and you drive to the astral realm. It's a state of being where physics behaves a certain way. Then you have the elemental realm, or the quantum realm. Okay, those are the same. Quantum is a word that means fundamental, and it was introduced because people really like metaphysics. Sorry, sometimes there's some loud cars, so I'll just pause when I drive by. But you really should think about it like and call it like the elemental realm, because a lot of people who are scientists are very skeptical of all this stuff, and when they hear you say things like the quantum realm, they'll be like, that's not a scientific term, and you're using a scientific word, and they'll put their nose in the air, and it really just doesn't matter enough like to battle people on it. So I'd still call it the elemental realm, but you might see it called the quantum realm, and that's why I put it there. But the elemental realm is essentially like the particles and the forces and the way that physics behaves on very, very small scales. So quantum mechanics versus cosmology. Okay, astral physics, astral realm is like the realm of cosmology, and quantum or elemental, the elemental realm is the quantum physics. Those would be like the science disciplines. You'll also hear these called planes of existence, and what we're really saying when we talk about planes of existence is that you have several realms basically on a plane of existence. So the divine plane of existence is made up of the astral, the elemental, the mundane, and the other world. 4 realms. And then, you know, in the divine plane of existence, the distinction between realms disappears, and they all appear to be one interconnected thing. You know, because, you know, we can separate them out and categorize them as much as we want, but we can't really separate the fact that everything is fundamentally one thing. Everything exists on some fundamental level, the most basic level of all. Existence and non-existence is the only true dichotomy in the universe, really. It's like, because everything exists, it is one, and it is connected as one. It all is made up of the same fundamental energy. It's all just little bits of strings vibrating in different ways, and it all obeys physical laws according to specific interactions and relationships. Okay, so I want to get all this out there first, the discussion of realms. Now we're just going to talk about in this one the elemental realm, okay? And we're not going to talk about it in terms of science, really. So we're not going to talk about it in terms of science, really, because this is just a course on Wicca. This is not a course on metaphysics. But I want you to understand that these do have a physical analog, okay? So the elemental realm contains the fundamental forces, the building blocks of physical life. Now, when the original elements, earth, air, fire, and water, were invented, they didn't have the means of seeing particles. So they didn't understand the 4 fundamental forces of life. But we can compare these forces that they came up with here with those forces perfectly. The energy encapsulated in each one of these elements is a fundamental force of nature. And it's no coincidence that there's 4 elements and 4 fundamental forces of nature. So you can look at it from the perspective of, like, oh, loud car. Give me a minute to think anyway. You can look at it from the perspective of you know, the poetic, mystical interpretation of the forces, and you can look at it from a scientific perspective, and we're going to kind of look at it a little bit from both. Earth represents stability, strength, and physical embodiment, our biology, okay? So the energy of Earth is the energy of our physical being, of our existence. Whereas air, that is the energy of mystery, discovery, change, and restlessness. So air is like on the exact opposite side of the spectrum. And the reason I give them in this order, earth, air, fire, and water, is because when you do ritual, you put earth in the north, air in the west, fire in the south, and air in the east, and fire in the south, and water in the west. I did the circle right, but I said the directions wrong because I'm terrible. So that's why they're in this order. But if you really think about it, it's really like, because of the representation, it's really like air is the farthest away from earth, not the next one, because you go earth, water, fire, air. Really, it builds up the other way. The circles go in different directions based on if you're doing astrology versus, it's like that. But earth is the first one in astrology as well. Earth is in the first quadrant, and air is in the last. So it's all the same. It just doesn't matter which way you draw the circle. But then, so really we should read this like earth is stability, strength, physical embodiment. Water is the creation, birth, healing, emotions, receptivity. So that's the part of us that is imaginative and emotional. That's the less physical but still physical part of us. And then you get into fire, and that's destruction, transformation, attraction, and vitality. So that is like our spiritual essence, like our soul. It's like the fire that keeps us alive, the fire that keeps us going. And then finally you get to air, which is that mystery, discovery, change, and restlessness. So all of these things are driving factors in existence, right? So one of them drives you to want to find a partner. The other one drives you to want to have children with that partner. One of them drives you to want to seek out a better existence for your family and your partner. Find a better way of doing things. That's air. Then you have, the physical existence itself. That's earth. So all of these forces, you can see where people come up with these. They created these as analogy, basically as a big analogy for the energy that is required for someone to sustain life. And the analogy holds when you start to talk about nature as well. So what about spirit? I have this slide here because we haven't really been talking about spirit at all. Spirit really is all of the elements combined, or more precisely, none of them. It's like what we talked about the one time with light, where you have a light is all of the white light is all of the different wavelengths of light combined, but light is the lack of pigments. So white light means there's no pigments at all. So is it a lack of something or a presence of something? It's both. It depends on if you're a glass half full, glass half empty kind of person. But spirit energy really is like the flip side of life. So you have like these 4 elements, and these are what's required to sustain life. And then you have spirit, and spirit is what links life and death. It's like what links life to past life, if that makes sense. So I redid the quad form chart from the first week. You'll recognize it maybe. And now you see the elements and how they fit in. So you have the white sphere, that is the energy that Wicca makes use of, and it uses all 4 of the elements, but it's on the light side. And then if you go farther down to the dark side, that's when you get more spirit energy and less elemental energy. Yeah. So you can think about this and decide how you want to think about this in the greater scheme of the universe, but really and you will not hear a lot of Wiccans break it down exactly like this, and the reason is because a lot of them don't study necromancy, so they don't have any reason to distinguish between death and life energy at all. But they are distinct energies, and if you're working with life or death energy, you'll understand. Now there are some people who are sourced in spirit, so for example my primary element is spirit, which is weird. But I also have a secondary life element because I work with life energy as well. So if your element is spirit, then you're probably a medium, or you're meant for a path like necromancy or something like that. And I was actually on a path of necromancy, but I decided I really wanted to work with life energy, and I wanted my life's working to be with life energy. And so that's why I decided to become a Wiccan high priestess instead, because I just fell in love with life. And now I do a lot of work with that. But so my actual element in terms of life energy, oh, it's the street cleaner. Okay, I'm just going to pause it. Give me a second. This guy is really slow. Man, the street cleaners are so loud. They always wake me up in the morning too, sometimes. Yeah, but so if you're using, so my life element is air, which makes sense because air is the most transcendent of life elements, right? It's the one that kind of links into spirit, into death, and this comes from the nice that I have this here. Good flow, yay! Good criticism on myself. This links in with this chart right here. So you have earth and fire; those are the building blocks of life. Earth is feminine, fire is masculine. So you have the feminine and masculine physical forms. Okay, so you have like literal sex right here, earth and fire. Then when you get to the next level, you have water, which is still feminine, and air, which is masculine. And these are like the transcendent versions of the lower ones. So with earth, you have steady physical existence, like, you know, so you have life itself, and then with water you have emotions and creation and healing and protection. So you have a desire for happiness. You have the meaning of life, right? So you have life, and the meaning is life. And then with fire you have energy, vitality, you know, destruction, but also transformation. Really more than destruction, because when you burn a forest down, a new forest grows from the ashes. And then when you get into air, you have like the mystical, less fiery, less aggressive, less destructive version of it, which is of masculinity, and it's instead it's mystical and unknowable, and then you go from those two kind of up into spirit. So it builds up. It's like different tiers, even within the elemental realm. So we're going to talk a little bit about each element. I have here the, I should have moved, maybe I can move it. Hold on, let me try something. Okay, I hope that worked. I moved the little video thing over here so I could just talk about the slide easier and make sure you guys can see it. It didn't even occur to me that that might be getting in the way, because I can actually see through the little video box, but I don't think you can see through it on when I convert this to YouTube. So I want you to be able to see the invoking and banishing. These are things that you probably should write down in your Book of Shadows and memorize. I am guilty. I have not memorized them myself. But the theory is the same, and I'll talk about that later. And so you could just memorize the theory if that's easier for you, but it might require you to do some calculations when you're in ritual. It depends if you want to use these or not. These are often used to invoke the element in ritual and banish it at the end of ritual. They would often draw these 3 times for each one, sometimes just once. They'll say incantations, stuff like that, while they do it. By they, I mean Wiccans in general. Lots of Wiccans use these. The element earth, like I said, represents stability, prosperity, strength, abundance. These qualities are the qualities of self. These are the internal. So if you were going to evoke earth, then you are pulling on your sense of stability, your sense of prosperity, your strength, okay? If you are, if you're invoking earth, you're pulling on those qualities. You know, it doesn't really make sense, I guess, because I guess it's a little backwards. So when you evoke the elements, what you're really doing usually is, okay, so let me start at the beginning. Let me start back here. So when you do work with the elements and you bring these elements into circle, you are just kind of inviting them in. You're not even invoking them usually, but you can invoke them. When you invoke them, you bring the elemental energy into yourself so that you can do an evocation with the elemental energy, but when you're bringing the elemental energy in, you're just invoking it. However, when you go to evoke energy, elemental energy, you can't just evoke it, because the elements, and I think I talk about this. I could have sworn I had a slide on this, but I guess I don't. I guess I'm supposed to talk about it here. When you go to evoke the elements, you are really just, you'd have to like bind a fairy. So the elemental realm, okay, has a consciousness of its own. All of these different realms, there is consciousness of a different form than we're used to on our own mundane realm. Consciousness in the mundane realm is human life, animal life, you know, and we can debate about whether or not bugs are conscious, blah, 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 whatever, okay? That is consciousness in the mundane realm. Consciousness in the elemental realm still exists, okay, because consciousness is conserved between realms, but in the elemental realm, it just has a different form. And that's what the fairies are. They have a consciousness of their own, but it's not a consciousness that is bound to a physical form, because the concept of embodiment, as we know it, is defined by the elemental realm. So it doesn't exist in and of itself on the elemental realm, because physical embodiment is the elemental realm. If that makes any sense. So you can't invoke, you can't evoke elemental energy unless you are binding a fairy of some kind. Because anytime you try to evoke elemental energy, you will run into the consciousness that exists in the elemental realm. So when I've defined the bindings here by Fae and Self, because I guess I wanted to avoid talking about this at this stage in the presentation. So I'm sure I'm going to come back to this. But as we go through these slides, consider that when you're evoking an element, that means you're binding a Fae. If you're just invoking the element, bringing the element's energy within you, allowing it to help you bring out the qualities of yourself that are stability, prosperity, wealth, strength, and abundance, then that invocation doesn't require you to bind any fairy energy. The elements exist within you, in other words. And all you have to do is, like, allow them into your conscious in a very specific way, you know, and then you can actually make use of this energy, your own internal energy. So it's an invocation, even though it's internal energy, is really what I'm trying to say. I know it doesn't make sense. We're going to come back to it. Okay? But for now, I've broken the bindings down by Fae and Self. So just keep this in mind. We're going to come back to it. The associations for Earth, the physical force is electromagnetism. Okay, so think about it. Electricity and magnetism is light. It is the force that keeps physical objects together. So without any electricity and magnetism, then my laptop would fall through the table, through the floor, through the earth. You would fall through the earth. Like, you just keep falling. You know, there'd be no corporeal existence at all. Electromagnetism is the force that defines the physical laws of our macroscopic world that allow it to be macroscopic. The foundation of macroscopy. Okay. So again, don't think too much into that. If you're really interested about the physics of this, then talk to me and we'll go over it some more, because it's really cool. The herbs that help you to invoke Earth would be patchouli, grains of any kind, nuts, cedar, cypress, oak, ivy, honeysuckle, magnolia, sage, honey. There's metals. Crystals are obviously anything that comes from the earth, anything greenish. You know, salt is on here even. A lot of people don't think of that as a crystal, but it is crystal. Tiger eye, and the astrological signs in order of cardinal, fixed, mutable, Capricorn, Taurus, Virgo. I'm going to do a course on astrology at some point, so I'm not going to go into that too much here. So air, there's the invoking and banishing for air. The bindings, the fae are sylphs. The classic fairies. Sylphs are like cloud-like beings. They float around and live in the sky. Classic fairies. From yourself, this is the element of dreams and psychic power, song, travel, and visualization. The physical force that it aligns with is the strong force. So if you know anything about physics, the strong force is what keeps protons compact, and it's what allows protons and other protons to stick together inside of a nucleus, even though they would normally repel. So it's very mystical. Why does this force exist? How does this force work? We don't really know. Even in science, we don't really know. So the strong force is, you know, the mystical force that kind of interacts on the deepest levels and allows the universe to continue to operate in the right way. The herbs here: myrrh, primrose, vermilion, clove, mugwort, frankincense, rosemary. Mugwort also aligns with spirit, so you can use mugwort for spirit workings as well. I didn't really include spirit in this as a breakdown. Most people don't, because spirit is kind of a little bit of all of them, but there's certain things that work better when you're working with death energy and spirit energy. The metals: tin and copper, crystals, amethyst, opal, snow quartz, sapphire, blah, blah, blah. Astrological signs, again, Libra is cardinal, Aquarius is fixed, Gemini is mutable. Just so you guys know, when I list this, cardinal means creative energy, like like the cardinal moon is the waxing moon, the fixed moon is the full moon, and the mutable moon is the waning moon. Okay, so all of these signs align with that cardinal, fixed, mutable. Oh, shoot, I did not put the right picture here. This is the Earth picture, but this is, okay, so give me a second because I want it to be right, so I'm going to pause. Okay, I fixed it. Water. So, the fairies here are undines, which are like sea serpents. Any kind of monster of the sea would be in this category. This would include like giant squids and water dragons, mermaids. The emotions or the energy from self, as we talked about, is emotions, receptivity, healing, and purification. The physical force with water is gravity, and this makes a lot of sense if you think about gravity, right? So gravity is like you put something on top of a hill and it rolls down the hill. It goes with the flow, right? It's like gravity is very much kind of like a passive force. It's like, oh, I see you over there. I'm going to slowly start to move towards you. And as they move towards each other, they get faster and faster and faster. Like they just go with the flow. That's gravity. So gravity is the force. Plants, fern, lotus, water lily, gardenia, thyme, seaweed, apple, mint, stevia, willow tree, sage, sage because of purification, you know. Metals are mercury and silver, crystals, anything blue, sodalite, blue tourmaline, blue topaz, pearl, even though it's not blue, obviously, though it's from the ocean. And the astrological signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Fire, we have, the bindings are, Fae is Salamanders. Salamanders is really like a broad category that actually includes dragons and snakes in the mystical world, but any kind of lizard, really, dragons, you know, that's this category. The energy from self, you know, it's just energy, love, passion, vitality, health, and the force here is the weak nuclear force. The weak nuclear force is the one that governs particle decay, so nuclear bombs are governed by the weak nuclear force, like that's how they work through that. And likewise, you know, the weak nuclear force is the one that also is responsible for merging particles and turning one particle into another particle. So that's basically what happens in fusion. So it's like, you know, the sun as well is captured here by this. So that's why this force goes with this element. The plants are garlic, hibiscus, pepper, cinnamon, coffee, legumes, cacti, basil, heliotrope, sunflower. Metals are gold and brass. Crystals, amber, bloodstone is the odd one because it's green, but it goes with this category. Just trust me if you've never touched one. Oh, also I should have listed dragon's blood for this for fire, because that's a common one that should be in fire. Black jasper, obsidian, any lava rock, hematite, rose quartz, anything pink or red really goes in here. Smoky quartz as well. And the signs are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. This is the kind of stuff you just like write down in your book of shadows, and then if you ever need it, you have it. But you don't usually need to know this stuff. So binding the elements. So I want to talk about the invoking and banishing because there's something really cool here. So let's look at water and air, which are right next to each other. So water here is the banishing pentagram of air, and vice versa for air. So in order to invoke air, you have to banish water, and vice versa. So this is where you get the true opposites. So a lot of people think fire and water are opposites. They're not. Water and air are opposites. And you could tell because, so remember when we looked at this chart, what corner everything is in. Air, water, earth, fire. Take a mental picture of it, okay? Remember? Well, look at the pentagrams. You are drawing towards whatever corner you want to invoke. So if you want to invoke fire, you start at the top and you draw toward fire. That is also one way to banish spirit.
if you want to invoke fire, or banish fire, you start at the bottom and you draw up away from fire, right? So that makes sense. So again, you want to invoke water, you start at the air corner and you draw toward water. You want to do the opposite. You start at the water corner and you draw toward air. So fire and water are actually complements, and earth and air are complements. And many people don't understand that because fire and water seem like opposites and air and earth seem like opposites. But the true opposites are water and air and fire and earth. I'm going to convince you of that. So when you have to, so in all of the creation myths, they start off by saying so and so separated the horizon, separated the sea from the sky. Okay, there you go. Air and water are opposites. They needed to be divided in order for spirit to be able to take on physical form. The first step, when we were building the universe, and we take this ball of spirit, and we want this ball of spirit to break down into a physical universe, the first thing we do is separate it into water and air. Then, on the water, we use fire and earth to create land and life. Right? So these are like subsets of each other, and you'll find that every element does have every other element in it. To some extent. So, for instance, if you're looking at it from the astrological perspective, you have like fixed Taurus. Taurus is the reason why the first quadrant belongs to Earth, because it's a fixed Earth sign. The Aries, the first sign in that quadrant, though, is fire. It's the fire of Earth. What is the fire of Earth? Volcanoes. So Aries is like the energy that's like about to erupt out of you. Super energy, always ready to be angry, hotheads, very creative, inventive, pioneering, literally creating land, out of nothing. That is the energy of Aries. So that's how you can see. That is the fire of Earth, right? Does that make sense? So each of these elements have some of the other elements in them. Now the opposite to fire and earth really is together spirit. Because the opposite of so earth and fire are not really opposites, right? Like I just said, they work together to create life. Whereas water and air are opposites. In order to have earth, you don't have to banish fire. In order to have earth, you have to banish spirit. Now, the way that they've drawn the pentagrams here, though, they've used the spirit invocations that involve drawing to the corners, which is fine. You can invoke active spirit by drawing this way. That's one way to do it, because you're invoking kind of like the spirit of air. And if you're drawing this way, you're invoking the spirit of water, which is passive. So you have active versus passive. You have aggressive versus, so masculine versus feminine energy, the polarity. I've also seen people draw these arrows starting here, up here, drawing to the corner of spirit, so that it mimics the rest of them. And the only reason they haven't done that here is because a lot of people don't like thinking about it like this. They don't like thinking about it like earth and fire are together, the opposites of spirit. Doesn't make sense to them. They want it to be symmetrical. They want it to be like, well, water and air are opposites, earth and fire are opposites. But it's not symmetrical. There's 5 points in the star. So the symmetry is going to have to break somewhere, and this is where it does. Fire and earth, which are both together in these bottom corners, fire and earth, are the opposites of spirit. So in all honesty, when I'm doing the invocation, I start in this corner and I draw up here to invoke spirit active, and I start here and draw up to invoke spirit passive. I don't really differentiate between spirit active and spirit passive all that much, but spirit active and spirit passive are just like, the energy of spirit passive is kind of like the energy that is inherently in all things, and spirit active is like, I want to work with death energy specifically. I guess the difference could be in your intent in the ritual. You could say it's the intent. So, and this relationship all comes from astrology, like I've mentioned now. So, that's a lot of where this comes from is based in astrology. Okay, Great. So, man, there's a lot of issues with this PowerPoint presentation I miss, like the space here. Good job. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears. So the first 40 minutes we talked about realms and elements, and honestly that took less time than I thought it would, so I feel like I'm probably missing something major. But that's okay. The overview of tools section here is going to kind of be a recap of what you've already read. I hopefully will have a little bit of new information for you, but you know, Scott Cunningham does a good job of talking about these things, so this might be familiar, and if you guys have any questions that I don't talk about in this video here, please feel free to leave a comment or send an email. So first of all, tools are not a requirement. They help. They help you get into altered states of mind. They help you get into altered states of mind more quickly than you could through meditation. What might take you like 10 minutes of clearing your head and calming down, you could do instantly based on the tool. If the tool has been enchanted properly, it's been consecrated to be used in a certain way, then as soon as you pick it up, your mind will feel different. It also helps you direct energy as intended, and it helps filter energy inward so that you can do safer invocations. You know, I really think it's odd that I didn't talk. Oh, you know what? I bet it's coming up. Okay, let me go through the tools, and then I might take a few minutes and go back to the elements so that we can really talk about the difference between evocation and invocation of elements. Although I probably will go into that extensively next week. Whew, okay, we'll see. Let me get my whole head on track here. So let's talk about the tools, and we'll come back to that. The wand versus the Athame. This is a very easy question to answer if you truly understand the difference between invocation and evocation. Remember that invocation is taking energy into oneself from outside. Evocation is generating the energy internally and sending it outward. So the wand is used for invocation. It's used in situations like calling upon a deity or spirits, any kind of medium work. You'd hold it in your hand while you're speaking an invocation or you're making a petition in ritual. The Athame is used for evocation. It is used for commanding and manipulating energy, specifically life energy, like we've talked about this whole time, via the elements. And it's used typically for consecrating tools or spaces, which is what casting circle is, consecrating space. So the wand is used for invocation of deity. It's also used for any kind of spirit energy, and it aligns with the element wind. It's the channel to higher awareness and mysticism. So when you're using your wand, it's like very easy for you to be aware of higher planar beings, the consciousnesses that are the four elements that are deity. The wand is really a tool for seeing the world as it is and not as it appears to be to our limited human minds. There are many different types of wands. So wands are usually made of wood. Different woods do different things. So for instance, my wand is black oak, and I use it primarily for spirit work and necromancy. Most of my patrons are of the darker nature, so even though I'm Wiccan and I work with life energy, I still mostly work with death patrons, you know, like Anubis, and then Lil as well. She's the crone of her tri-goddess form. And so, you know, rebirth and past life workings, that kind of stuff. Whereas the Weeping Willow, for instance, as another example, that is more of healing and protection and sex magic, erismancy. If you were going to use like regular oak, that would be more like spirit passive, right? So black oak is like spirit active. That's like actual death spirit energy. And then you have like oak, that would be like the spirit energy that is intrinsic to all of life. So that'd be like spirit in the form of all of the elements. That's how you can think about the difference between spirit active and spirit passive. Spirit active is like spirit itself, the lack of elements, and spirit passive is like the spirit that is defined by containing all of the other elements within it. Wands can be made of crystal. I have pictures of some here. Some of the crystal wands are really small. They don't even look like wands, but they still are wands. Crystals also contain an energy of their own, so you have to work with the crystal before you can use it as a wand. You have to be able to distinguish between the wand itself and your energy for it to be effective. Crystals can be especially good for healing. They're also able to be used as athames. They enable both invocation and evocation, basically. They're very discreet. They can be brought on airplanes. They're allowed where blades are not allowed. So a lot of people do like to have both a regular wand and a crystal wand, and they use the crystal wand in place of both the wand and the athame. The athame, that is used for evocation of personal energy and elemental energy, usually all at once, right? Because, okay, so this is coming back into the difference. So evocation of personal energy means that you are generating the energy, and then evocation of elemental energy would mean that you are binding a fairy of some kind. So I guess what this should say actually is evocation of personal energy and invocation of elemental energy, which happens all at once because most people intuitively pull on the elements' energies when they do magic. They don't even necessarily distinguish between the energy of the elements and themselves, because the energy of the elements are within us. And that is technically invocation, again, because you're not actually working with the consciousness that is inherent in the elements. Instead, you're just pulling the energy of the elements through your physical form and outward. It's just like this really gray area, because it's like invocation and evocation at once, because the elements are within you, but they're also not within you. If you stopped existing, the elements would still be there. If there was no human life, there would still be elements. So it's not pure evocation to use elemental, it's not really evocation to use the elemental energy within you. Just because you're made up of elemental energy doesn't mean that you can just direct it at will. It's not your energy, right? You still have to invoke the elemental energy to be able to direct it, because even though it makes you up and it builds you up, and it's interesting actually, because this is where the Kabbalistic notion that you don't own your body comes from. They don't get, in Orthodox Judaism, they don't get tattoos or anything like that, because they don't believe that you own your body. And this is where that comes, this is where you find that whole philosophy in Wicca. This is the foundation of it. And that's not to say that this is how they came to this conclusion, because I don't actually necessarily know who came to that conclusion, actually, because it's not in the Torah. It might be in the Talmud somewhere. The Talmud is long and terrible, and I haven't read it all the way, obviously, but no one has, pretty much. But, and even if you had read it all the way, you probably wouldn't remember all of it, so I don't really know where they get it from in Judaism, but this is where you can find the foundation of that belief, really, is that you can't invoke, rather, you can't just make use of the energy that makes you up. I can't just sit here and think about it and take fat off of my body and turn it into energy to be used in magic. I don't have that kind of control over my physical form. Why? Because my physical form, even though it's made up of elemental energy, that elemental energy is not mine. So, you know, and this comes down to the fundamental truth. It's like, we have divinity within us. Does that mean we are divinity? It's a very difficult question to answer, and I don't know that we have enough time here. But for all intents and purposes, I want you to walk away understanding this. When you are working with elemental energy in circle, you are invoking that energy. When you evoke the elemental energy, you bind Fae. We will talk about how to do that in the next lecture, even though I don't really want anybody doing it at this stage. If you are watching these lectures and you are learning, and you're watching these specifically to learn Wicca, not just for fun, then you are probably not advanced enough to evoke fairies without risk to yourself. I will talk about it and how to do it because I trust you people. But I want you to be careful. Evoking fairies is tricky. They are not your energy. They will wreak havoc on your energy, and you may not even know because elemental energy is fundamentally within you, even when you don't bind the Fae. If that makes any sense. I know you're going to have questions. Please reach out with your questions. I would love to answer them. This particular distinction is very difficult for people to understand. Okay, but back to the Athame. It's also called a black-handled knife. That's especially Gardnerian, Alexandrian style. It aligns with the element fire, since it represents the vital energy of our soul. So the Athame is for invocations because the Athame is for evocations because it's taking your internal, spiritual, fiery, energetic self, the part of you that can generate magic, and it's taking that and allowing you to direct it outwards in a specific way. It also represents divine masculinity. So if you're going to follow the Wiccan path, then that's relevant. We'll talk about how in a minute. There are different types of Athames. Some say the blade must be sharpened, and some say it must be double-sided. That's all from Wicca. They say it must be double-sided because if you're doing the banishing and you're using the Athame, you'd have to twist the blade in a funny way to be able to cut. They envision it as actually cutting through time and space itself. So that's why they say it must be double-sided and it must be sharpened. If you don't believe that, you think it's all metaphorical anyway, which, you know, it's metaphysical, so you can interpret it either way and you're not wrong, then you might not care if it's sharpened. And if you draw blood with your Athame, it's useless because it works with life energy only. You can't channel death energy with an Athame. And once the blood leaves your veins, then it's a source of death energy. So it can't draw blood, and that's why many people just get like basically letter openers that are shaped like swords, and they use those. Some people have swords that are sharp that could cut your head off, you know, so it's all kind of like up to you in that regard. I have some pictures on each slide of different ones that you can see. I actually have the one Athame in the middle here. So the cauldron is usually made of pewter or iron, and it usually has 3 legs. It doesn't have to have those requirements, but that's what it usually is. It aligns with the elements of water and spirit. It represents rebirth and transformation in a constructive sense. So immortality, this represents kind of the rebirth itself, like the being born. There's this whole myth with Caradwyn's Cauldron, which I don't really have time to tell you guys here, but this is where the transformation comes from, is that myth. It's very Celtic. It describes a bard who is a druidic leader, so that's a different path in Wicca that I'm actually studying right now because there's a member of, there's a guy who's not in our coven who might join, but he's very interested in druidry, and he was asking me about it, so I'm actually researching it extensively now. In the notes on this slide, if you download the slides, you'll see in the notes I've included the whole tale, so feel free to check it out or search for it on Wikipedia and read it for yourself. The cauldron is often the main part of the ritual and placed in the center of the altar. It's used for things like burning tinctures, that's like collections of spices and herbs. It's used for burning paper that you might have written, like sigils or something on. So for instance, you might do a ritual for manifestation where you light a cauldron, write something on paper, put your energy into it, and then burn it in the cauldron. The idea is that you will be transformed by that experience. Something constructive will come from it. That's the representation of the cauldron. You can also use them for brewing potions and elixirs, and for scrying. Scrying is you'd fill it with water or flames, something like that, and you can just like use it for fire scrying or water scrying or any kind of divination by relaxing the mind and just trying to see patterns, and that's what a cauldron is used for. The censer can be a cauldron. There's a picture of a little miniature cauldron there. That's a censer. But it can also just be a tray or like a container like that hangs, something that burns incense. It aligns with the elements of air and fire. It represents rebirth and transformation in a destructive sense. So this is like tearing everything down so it can be reburned. So this would be like more like banishing, you know, not a manifestation spell, but getting rid of negative energy, so that you can be transformed later. That's what the censer is for. Through ashes of old and with persevering of spirit comes life, right? So that's where you get the air and fire. Some use incense cones and others use blends of incense. I have like how to make a blend of incense in the comments on this slide, so feel free to look at that. It's used for scrying. Again, like smoke scrying. It's also used to help alter one's mind, the scent of the incense and everything. And it's used for cleansing. You know, you might go around the circle, you might cleanse things through air and fire, and then you would put salt and water. So that's for earth and water on it. So the chalice. The chalice is a wine goblet of some form. It's usually crystal or glass. It aligns with the element water, and it symbolizes the channel of receptivity into ourselves. So on the altar, the chalice is the divine femininity. It's like that which allows the goddess to come down and be a part of our lives. It's used pretty much entirely for divine reasons, offerings to the gods or to fairies, symbolizing the great rite. That's another one. So the great rite originally was when a man and woman had sex. Most Wiccans today, they don't actually do that in ritual anymore because it's frowned upon. So they would often have a partner they do the great rite with, but in ritual, the great rite is done symbolically with the Athame, the divine masculinity, and the chalice, the divine femininity. So you can see a few pictures on the slide of them putting the blade into the chalice that represents sex, you know, the great rite. So. The broom, often these are handcrafted from reeds or twigs. It aligns with the element water. A lot of people might think it's air because you fly on brooms, but you don't really fly on brooms. We never really flew on brooms. Nobody ever did that. So it symbolizes purification. That's why it aligns with water and energy and protection. People will put brooms on their hearth, and if the broom falls over, then they'll know an evil spirit has come in, or they'll put it there to keep the energy out. In hand fasting ceremonies, people will jump over a broom so that it's like they're leaving their individual negativity behind and entering into their new life together, both purified and ready to, you know, purification of intent is really what the symbolism is in the hand fasting. And cleansing indoor spaces. So you don't really need to sweep before ritual outdoors, but you do need to sweep before ritual indoors usually. So. And you don't actually have to sweep. The broom may never touch the ground. That if you're sweeping the energy. So. The Bolline, that's also called the white-handled knife. I actually didn't even know it was called a Bolline until recently. It aligns with the element earth, since it's used to gather physical supplies for the ritual. It's used for cutting flowers, engraving sigils on candles or in wands or anything like that. It's only to be used in ritual space though. So even though this is the most mundane of tools, you can't just pick up the white-handled knife for just about anything. You have to be doing it for some ritual purpose. Now, if you believe that everything is for some ritual purpose, then you could use it for anything. But it's up to how you believe it. So if you believe I have to have a circle around me to be in consecrated space, and then I'm in ritual space, and then everything is divine, and I'm thinking only divine thoughts at that time. So then in that case, you should only use the white-handled knife in circle. If you're always on that level, then feel free to use it whenever you want. There's different kinds. Some of them are shaped like the crescent. Some of them are just single-sided like this. This blade is really designed to be practical more than, so don't get a double-sided Bolline because that doesn't make any sense. So some of the other tools I'm just going to touch on, the bell that's used for purification through air, the element air, because it's related to sound. And it's also used to like distinguish different ritual proceedings. People also use those like bowls that you have and you tap them and they make noise. They're like bells, but they're bowls. That's fine too. The crystal sphere, that's used for divination. It's the representation of genderless divinity. So you have the woman, okay, that is the chalice, and then you have the man, and that is the Athame. And that's because in Wicca, there's no such thing as really like gender. There's just like sex, right? So you're a man if you have a dick, and you're a woman if you have a vagina, and that's just like the way Wicca sees it, because this was before any of the modern revelations about the difference between gender and sex, and that can happen. So in light of that, they still kind of came up with an option that's like genderless divinity, and that would be like the crystal ball. So different crystals align with masculine and feminine polarity. So depending on what kind of crystal you have on the altar, your crystal might be more inclined to be masculine or feminine, but it's not based on the sex of a man or a woman, right? Because it's just a sphere. It's not phallic. It's not like a vagina. It's not, right? So the crystal ball is really the only tool that comes out of Wicca that is, in essence, genderless divinity. And some people will just use crystals for their deity instead of candles. Like, so I have a clear quartz crystal, and sometimes I'll just use that, and that's the only thing I'll have for divinity on the whole altar, because I won't care if I'm working with divine or masculine polarity energy. A lot of times I don't care. Most of the time I'm doing magic, I don't care what type of energy, I don't care what gender the energy I'm using is. So the crystal ball is kind of like, and it's used for divination as well. So it's a very versatile thing. A lot of people have a couple different crystals that they get out and put on their altar, depending on what kind of time of year it is or what they're working on. The pentacle is actually, the pentagram is the 5-pointed star. The pentacle is many times thought of to be the 5-pointed star in the circle, but a pentacle actually can be any symbol. There is a pentacle here that is that's just Mercury's pentacle. You see it does have the 5-pointed star, but it also has a bunch of other symbols in Theban and other symbols that are not any language. So that's like specifically a pentacle to Mercury. You'll find some where it's like it'll just be a symbol that's not the 5-pointed star, and that's technically still a pentacle too. The pentacle is basically like a platter or a plate of some kind. Usually you'll put offerings on it, and you use it as the offering plate. Sometimes you'll charge it with energy and make it into a sigil to use in a later ritual, and sometimes you'll actually enchant it or bind it right then and there. The actual pentagram, the 5-pointed star itself, represents purification. So some people will just use that as a symbol of protection. So a lot of different uses for that. Yeah. This is the classic altar setup. You'll have like a candle in each of the quadrants for the earth, air, fire, and water, and you can figure out which is which based on the colors. The Athame goes at the bottom because it's associated with fire. The chalice is the water. The wand is the air. Some people have a candle snuffer that they'll put next to the wand over an air. I don't know why it goes there. That's just where it goes. And then you'll have the censer. That is a combination of air and fire, so that goes down in that corner. Then you have water and salt, which is a combination of water and earth. So I don't know why it doesn't go in the top right corner, but most people put it in the bottom left corner just so that it's easy to access because you use it a lot. You put the pentagram or a pentacle of some form. If you're not expressly Wiccan and you want to still have an altar like this, you could put any kind of pentacle in the center there. You'll usually have a candle for the goddess and god. Sometimes it'll be a bust. Sometimes you'll have a candle and a bust, and crystals, whatever you want to do to represent deity, you could put on the altar at that point. If you wanted to just have a single crystal sphere and leave deity off the altar altogether, you could put a single crystal sphere just above where it says crystals, and then just still have some crystals to represent earth, so that it's clear that there's a distinction between the earth and the crystals. If you were doing like some super fusion druid Wicca atheist path, maybe you would just have a single crystal ball here, and it would be like the earth is deity. That's fine. That's how you conceive of it. Do that. The hourglass usually goes up above the god candle because it's thought of as being father time. No idea why. The spirit candle can go on either side. The bell is a feminine tool, but it's often put on the god side because it's associated with air because it makes sound. So the bell is one of those that's kind of like, this is a ridiculous thing to say, but the bell is almost like a transgender tool because it does usually go on the God side, and it's like it aligns with the masculine element air, but it actually represents like femininity, and it's a feminine tool. So it's like the femininity of masculinity. So I mean, all the polarity stuff is like, make of it what you will. So if you perceive of it being genderless and there's just like one god or goddess and that's it, and you don't even like to put a gender on it, then that's fine, and you can put things where you want. People move these things around based on what they're doing and what they believe, and this is just the traditional setup. It's like everything makes kind of like some sense in terms of like what elements it aligns to and that kind of stuff. Now you'd always have this altar facing north. The earth candle goes in the north, so you have to know what direction everything is when you set it up. So, okay, gestures. I have some pictures here for the gestures, so I don't have to actually stand up and do stuff. Directing energy, usually you'll have like 2 fingers, and you'll point with 2 fingers, and that's how you'll direct energy. People will do the god and goddess pose. The god pose is arms crossed, solemn. Some people will put double horns up. They'll put horns like this to represent the horn god. The goddess pose is your feet are shoulder width apart, or wider. Your arms are wide. You're very much like a starfish. Okay, you're like open, ready to receive energy. A lot of people will start to put their hands like this while they're just standing in ritual, because it's just like, it just feels natural. Like, it just feels like what you want to do. I've included some gestures here for the chakras. These are the things that they do when they're meditating to like try to open each chakra. So if you're having issues with your root chakra, that's the traditional. If you're having issues with the sacral chakra, you put your hands like this. If you're having issues with your third eye chakra, you put your hands like this. And you meditate like here. Right. So different positions for the hands are believed to help you open different chakras. On the right side here, we have the elemental gestures. These are like small gestures, what they're doing here. But most people actually, Earth is usually upside down. I almost didn't include this picture because of it. I don't know why they have it like this. This is not Earth. This is water. Earth is upside down like this, toward the ground. Earth. Okay. Most people will do it in a stance, like an actual stance. If they're doing this, they won't just do the symbols. They'll do actually like, they'll stand with their hands like will be like this, splayed out above them for air. For earth, they'll stand with their hands like this. Fire, they might put their hands up like this. And for water, they'd have their hands cupped like mid-cup level. So there's different variations on this. The earth one in this picture is actually legitimately wrong, though. If you're doing earth like this, that's not going to be effective. I very rarely have to say things like, that's not the right way to do it, that's not the right way to do it. It's supposed to be up like this. I've never seen anybody anywhere ever do this for earth. This is too much like water. It doesn't make any sense. I almost didn't include the picture because of it, but it's the only picture I could find that was even close. So, okay, so here's a bunch of symbols I recommend checking out. Just pause the slide and take a look at them. It's very obvious why these things are what they are when you actually start to look at them. But the ones I wanted to call out are the Theban alphabet. A lot of people memorize that, and they keep their books of shadows in Theban so other people can't read them. I feel like if someone's picking up a book and it's written in Theban, that's just as suspect as them picking up a book that's not. Also, because it's a simple cipher, it's easy to decode. Anybody that knows anything about the English language could easily read it without even speaking a word of Theban, but a lot of people are idiots. So if you need that level of secrecy, or you like it and you want to do it, by all means, feel free. I have the Theban alphabet copied down in my book, and I never use it. But it is good to know. The goddess sign is the one most commonly seen in emojis. You'll have like they'll do like a backwards parenthesis, a 0, and then a forward parenthesis to represent this goddess sign, you'll often see this symbol on the forehead of an elder high priestess during ritual. Sometimes even high priestesses will wear it. It just depends on the lineage, whether or not that's allowed. They have different symbols in different lineages, so I didn't bother to include them all. These are just the symbols that are common to all Wiccans, basically. The last slide here I have is on music. Music during ritual should be live when possible, not pre-recorded. Drums can help bring on an altered state of mind, like when you're drumming and not really paying attention and you're just allowing yourself to just feel the music and feel the beat. You don't even care how it sounds. That really does help change your state of mind. So can singing and humming. They can do that as well, but you have to be able to like leave all of your baggage behind. Don't worry about what people think about you. Just play the drum, and that'll help. There's something called the spiral dance in Wicca. That's when you dance and sing in a circle and you hold hands to raise energy together. So I have a video here that shows the spiral dance in Glastonbury, so I wanted to just show that real quick, and I hope the sound actually works in the recording. I don't know that you're going to hear the sound in the recording because it's coming through my headphones, but the spiral dance really is just like you hold hands and move in a circle, and eventually one of the circles goes inside the other one, and you form what's called a circle within a circle, and that's something that's supposed to be like really sacred. Music is usually an evocation tool more than invocation. Obviously, you're creating something, right? So that's evocation, but it depends. Some people use it during invocations as well. Sometimes I'll sing to evoke the goddess and the god. The really common song for that is the S.J. Tucker song, Witch's Rune. I really like that, where she sings in the chorus. She sings, Mother of the summer fields, goddess of the silver, join with us as power builds, dance with us a witch's rune. Right, so she's like saying, dance with us, a witch's rune. So that is an invocation. Come dance with us, goddess. Come dance with us, God. That is an invocation, right? So that is why, you know, that's how you can use invocation, or how you can use music as an invocation tool. It just depends. I think I'm going to list some common pagan artists here. S.J. Tucker, Black Christmas Night, Medieval is amazing. I love Medieval. It's just so interesting when her music is like, it helps alter your mind. Down the Bard is just like fun, like more like telling stories and talking about myths and talking about patrons, specifically Celtic ones because he's Druid. And then Lisa Theo, she's and then Lorena McKennitt also has a lot of songs that sound witchy, but I don't actually think that she's Wiccan. Those are not actually religious songs. Most of some of them are actually religious Christian. So, and now you can see in the video down there how the circle has looped back in on itself a few times. So they're going around. So while they're doing that, they might be singing something like, we are a circle within a circle with no beginning and never ending. We are a circle within a circle. And then they sing it over and over again. Something like that. So that's something that's really common in rituals. There's not usually that many people there. See how now some of the people on the inside are moving the opposite direction? So that's the real circle within a circle that makes it the spiral dance. They all hold hands, or it's one line of people that are spiraling around so many times that it becomes like this crazy mess. If everyone let go of each other's hands, it would be chaos. But because everyone stays together and works together, we can manage and get through the chaos together. That's the whole representation of the spiral dance, really. It's a way to raise energy in ritual that is very common. Yeah. Cool. Feel free to check out that video for yourself if you're interested. So now for people who are in the coven, who are doing the homework and turning it into me, please read chapter 9, part 2 only of Living Wicca. You don't have to read part 1. I don't want you to get confused. So a lot of people don't like Scott Cunningham because they think that he appropriates and that he's terrible in a lot of ways and that you can't be a solitary practitioner and blah, blah, blah. But I don't really care what people think about Scott Cunningham. I think that he's a very good author with a very good way of saying things, but I don't want to confuse anyone. So just stick to the parts that we're reading here for this series, and then if you're interested, when you're done doing this introductory series with us, go back and go ahead and reread all of his books for yourself if you're interested, but I don't want to confuse you, so just stick to part 2. Read pages 19 through 23 of Liber Null by Peter J. Carroll, and then in the Gardenarian Book of Shadows, I want you to read the sections that are called like this. They don't have like, they have page numbers, but they're all printed differently, the Books of Shadows, so it's just better if you just look up the specific sections. But these are just going to give you some examples of like the most traditional way of doing these types of rituals, working with tools. There's an overview on why to be sky clad, stuff like that. So check all that out. Let me know what you think about all of that. The homework that I'm going to put in the next video, which I'm going to produce in the next couple of days, actually, but I expect people to spend a couple weeks working on both this one and the next one. The next video is going to have some more reading related to actual spell work, and that's what we're going to focus on in the next lecture. But for now, just start to get an idea of what kind of spells you want to do and how you would go about doing them. You don't actually need to do these spells. I want you to just come up with 2 areas that need to be improved in yours or your friends' lives in the next few weeks. I want you to write 2 incantations, 1 for each one. Pay attention to syllables and rhyming. You know, you want it to sound poetic. You want it to sound magical. You want it to encapsulate what you need, and you want to be very careful that the wording gets you exactly what you need. So saying something like, I will come by more money, I wish for more money, is not always the wisest thing to do, because what if you wind up losing your job and becoming destitute and poor and homeless, and then you win the lottery and have a lot of money, right? But your whole life is ruined and your family's left you and it's all over. Like, you know, you might get what you want, but maybe it turns out it's not what you wanted in the end after all. So when you're doing spells, you want to make sure that you're being very specific, very concise, but it still has to be poetic and magical. So that's the trick. You want to try to think about what kind of crystals and candles you want to use. So think about the associations that we've talked about with the elements. Think about that kind of stuff. Just try to get a sense for, like, how does all of this fit together, you know? And send all of your thoughts to me. Give me any questions you have on any of this, anything in the reading. This is the lecture for you to catch up. If you're behind, you know, this is the week for you to get ready, get yourself in the right mindset to really start hunkering down and learning how to do actual magic. And then in the next lecture, which I'll send out, it'll go over how to do all of the magic, and then you'll spend the next couple of weeks just trying to try out different things and really kind of build a sense of what kind of magic you're going to do and all of that. So it's weird that I used up so much time, and I feel like I didn't even talk about everything I need to. I want to try to figure out what happened that my notes. So there's like extra notes here. Right, so that's something I didn't talk about, is that Earth and Fire are actually they're separate forces, but they're different manifestations of the same force in signs, the electroweak force. And it turns out you can't actually separate electricity and magnetism from the weak force in real life. You can only do it in certain lab settings, but the forces are so intertwined, they're basically essentially the same. And this is why Earth and Fire must come together to form the opposite of Spirit. Where did I talk about consciousness, though? I could have sworn I had notes or bits of slide that were related to that, but I guess I just didn't. Well, I'll make sure I talk about it more in the next one, the difference between evocation and invocation of elemental energy, because next week is, in the next lecture, is when we're actually going to be learning how to use elemental energy to do magic, so it fits. Alright, so that's all I've got here then, guys. Let me know your questions, drop a comment on the video, or you know, email me, whatever works best. And I hope that you guys are all coming along. Everyone seems to be doing really well, so I'm pretty happy about that. Blessed be everyone.